Sarah Mitchell stood at the kitchen window, watching the last of their neighbors pack their belongings into a wagon. The drought had claimed another family. 3 months without rain had turned their once green valley into a wasteland of cracked earth and dying crops. The Henderson family was the 5th to leave this month, heading east toward relatives in Missouri. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the heat radiating through it, even though the sun had begun to set. Behind her, baby Emma whimpered in her makeshift crib, a wooden crate lined with the softest blankets Sarah could find. At 18 months old, Emma was too young to understand why there was less food each day, why Mama cried when she thought no one was looking. "Mama, I'm hungry," came a small voice from the doorway. 7-year-old Tommy stood there, his clothes hanging loose on his thin frame. His brown hair, so much like his father's, fell into his eyes. Sarah's heart broke a little more each time she looked at him. He was trying so hard to be the man of the house since his father died 6 months ago in a mining accident. "I know, sweetheart. Supper will be ready soon," Sarah said, forcing a smile. She had stretched their last bit of cornmeal with water to make a thin porridge. It wouldn't fill their bellies, but it was all she had. The other children began gathering in the kitchen. 5-year-old Lucy dragged her worn cloth doll behind her, its button eyes hanging by threads. The twins, 3-year-old Mark and Matthew, held hands as they always did, their identical faces gaunt from hunger. 9-year-old Beth, the eldest, carried baby Emma on her hip with the practiced ease of someone forced to grow up too fast. "Where did the Hendersons go?" Beth asked, settling Emma into the high chair their father had carved before his death. "They went to find work and food," Sarah explained, ladling the thin porridge into 6 chip bowls. "Sometimes families have to travel to survive." "Are we going to leave too?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah paused, her hand trembling slightly as she held the ladle. The truth was, she didn't know how much longer they could stay. The bank had been patient about the mortgage payments, but that patience was wearing thin. Their savings had disappeared months ago, spent on medicine during the harsh winter when all the children had fallen ill with fever. "This is our home," she said finally. "Your papa built this house with his own hands. He cleared this land and planted our first garden right out there." She gestured toward the withered remains of what had once been their vegetable patch. "We're going to find a way to stay." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah wondered if she was lying to her children and herself. The pantry was nearly empty. Their last chicken had died 2 days ago, and they had eaten it stretched over 3 meager meals. The cow had stopped giving milk when there wasn't enough grass to feed her, and Sarah had made the heartbreaking decision to sell her to the traveling merchant for far less than she was worth. After the children had eaten their small portions, Sarah tucked them into bed in the 2 small bedrooms upstairs. She sang softly to Emma until the baby fell asleep, then checked on the other children. Lucy was already dreaming, her doll clutched tightly to her chest. The twins had curled up together in their shared bed, finding comfort in each other's presence. Tommy lay awake staring at the ceiling, and Beth pretended to sleep though Sarah could see the worry in her young face. "Everything will be all right," Sarah whispered to Beth, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "Mama will figure something out." Downstairs, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her husband's ledger book, trying to make sense of numbers that refused to add up properly. She had $3.17 left to her name. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and she needed $37. The general store would no longer extend credit, and there were no jobs for women in their small town of Cedar Falls. She pulled out the letter that had arrived that morning from the bank. The words blurred through her tears as she read it again. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings would begin if payment wasn't received within 14 days. After that, they would have 30 days to leave the property. Sarah buried her face in her hands. "James, where are you when I need you most?" Her husband had been the strength of their family, the one who always found solutions when problems seemed impossible. He had worked 16 hours a day in the copper mine to provide for them, coming home exhausted but always with a smile for his children and a gentle kiss for his wife. The mining accident had happened on a Tuesday. A tunnel collapsed that trapped 12 men underground. Only 4 had survived, and James wasn't among them. Sarah remembered the mine foreman standing at her door, hat in hand, telling her how sorry he was. The mining company had paid for the funeral and given her $50, money that was long gone now. A knock at the door startled Sarah from her memories. Who would be calling so late? She wiped her eyes and smoothed her dress before opening the door cautiously. A tall man stood on her porch, his hat pulled low over his face. In the dim light from her single candle, she could see he wore well-made clothes and carried himself with confidence. Mrs. Mitchell. His voice was deep and gentle. I'm sorry to bother you so late. I'm Jake Sullivan. I've been traveling through the area and heard about your situation. Sarah's hand tightened on the door frame. Strangers could mean trouble, especially for a woman alone with children. What situation would that be, Mr. Sullivan? The bank in town mentioned you might be facing some difficulties with your mortgage. I'm in the business of buying properties, and I thought perhaps we could help each other. Sarah's heart sank. Another vulture come to pick at their bones. Men had been circling their land since James died, hoping to buy it for a fraction of its worth from a desperate widow. I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Sullivan. This is our home. I understand, ma'am, but sometimes keeping a home requires making difficult choices. He shifted his weight, and Sarah noticed he favored his left leg slightly. May I ask what your plans are for making the mortgage payment? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of pride she didn't know she still possessed. That's hardly your concern, sir. Jake Sullivan removed his hat, revealing dark hair and kind eyes that seemed older than his face suggested. You're right, of course. Forgive my directness. I've spent too many years dealing with business matters and not enough time remembering proper manners. There was something about his tone that made Sarah pause. He didn't sound like the other land speculators who had come calling. There was respect in his voice, not the condescending pity she had grown to hate. I have 6 children, Mr. Sullivan. The youngest is barely walking. This land has been in my husband's family for 2 generations. I can't just sell it to the first person who offers to take it off my hands. 6 children, he repeated softly. That's quite a responsibility for one person. Sarah bristled at what she perceived as criticism. I'm perfectly capable of caring for my family. Thank you. I'm sure you are. That wasn't what I meant. Jake looked past her into the house, where a child's cough echoed from upstairs. Mrs. Mitchell, would you mind if I spoke plainly? You haven't been speaking plainly so far. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Fair point. Here's the truth. I know exactly how much you owe the bank, and I know you don't have the money to pay it. I also know that Jeremiah Watson has been sniffing around your property, offering about 1/3 of what it's worth. Sarah's blood ran cold. Watson owned half the businesses in town and had a reputation for ruthless dealings. If he got his hands on their land, he would probably tear down the house James had built and use the property for his cattle. What I'm proposing, Jake continued, is different from what Watson is offering. I'd like to discuss a way for you to keep your home and your land while solving your immediate financial problems. And what would you get out of such an arrangement? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face in the candlelight. Sometimes a man realizes he's been living his life all wrong, Mrs. Mitchell. Sometimes he gets a chance to do something right for once. Before Sarah could respond, Tommy appeared at her elbow, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Mama? Who's at the door? Sarah automatically put her arm around her son, drawing him close. Just a visitor, sweetheart. Go back to bed. Jake knelt down to Tommy's level, bringing his face into the light. Sarah could see a long scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and his nose looked like it had been broken more than once. But his smile was genuine as he looked at her son. You must be the man of the house, Jake said. That's a big responsibility. Tommy straightened his shoulders. I take care of Mama and my sisters and brothers. I bet you do a fine job of it, too. Jake glanced up at Sarah. A boy shouldn't have to carry such a heavy load, though. Tommy, please go back to bed, Sarah said firmly. She waited until her son's footsteps faded up the stairs before turning back to Jake. Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate your concern, but we're managing just fine. Are you? Jake stood slowly, wincing slightly as he put weight on his left leg. When's the last time those children had a full meal? When's the last time you had one yourself? The questions hit too close to home, and Sarah felt her composure cracking. That's none of your business. You're right again. But I'm going to make it my business if you'll let me. Jake put his hat back on his head. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for a few days. If you change your mind about talking, you can find me there. He turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Mitchell? Your husband was James Mitchell, wasn't he? Worked at the Copper Creek mine. Sarah nodded, surprised. I heard he was a good man. Died trying to help his fellow workers when that tunnel came down. A man like that deserves to have his family taken care of properly. With that, Jake Sullivan walked into the darkness, leaving Sarah standing in her doorway with more questions than answers. She closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. How did he know so much about James? About their financial situation? And what exactly was he proposing? Upstairs, Emma's crying interrupted her thoughts. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, her legs heavy with exhaustion and worry. She found the baby standing in her crib, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. Sarah lifted Emma and settled into the old rocking chair by the window, the same chair where she had nursed all 6 of her children. As she rocked Emma back to sleep, Sarah looked out at the moonlit landscape. Their land stretched as far as she could see, rolling hills that had once been green with grass and hope. James used to sit on the porch in the evenings, planning improvements to the house, talking about expanding their herd, dreaming of the legacy they would leave their children. Now those dreams seemed as barren as the land itself. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember her husband's voice, the way he used to tell her that everything would work out. We're fighters, Sarah, he used to say. The Mitchells don't give up easy. But James had never faced a situation like this. He had never had to choose between keeping their home and feeding their children. He had never had to look into the eyes of their babies and wonder where their next meal would come from. A soft knock on the bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. Beth peered around the corner, her nightgown white in the moonlight. Mama? I heard talking downstairs. Was someone here? Sarah beckoned her daughter closer. Beth was only 9, but she had her father's serious nature and her mother's stubborn determination. She saw too much, understood too much for a child her age. Just a man from town, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. Beth climbed onto the chair arm, careful not to disturb Emma. Are we going to lose the house, Mama? The direct question caught Sarah off guard. She had tried so hard to shield the children from their financial problems, but Beth was too smart to be fooled by reassuring words. I don't know, honey. I'm trying to find a way to keep it. The man who was here tonight, could he help us? Sarah stroked Beth's hair, marveling at how much her daughter looked like James. Same dark eyes, same determined chin. Maybe, but help always comes with a price, Beth. Sometimes that price is higher than we want to pay. What if the price is worth it? What if it means Tommy doesn't have to pretend he's not hungry anymore? What if it means the twins can play instead of worrying about grown-up things? The wisdom in her daughter's words made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. Why had Beth become so wise? Why had she started thinking like an adult instead of a child? Let's get you back to bed, Sarah said softly. Tomorrow is a new day. Maybe it will bring new possibilities. But as Sarah tucked Beth back into bed and returned Emma to her crib, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jake Sullivan's visit had already changed something fundamental about their situation. His words echoed in her mind. Sometimes a man realizes he's been living his life all wrong. What did he mean by that? And, more importantly, could she trust a stranger who seemed to know so much about her family's private affairs? Sarah returned to the kitchen and sat at the table with the bank's letter in front of her. 14 days. That was all she had left to find a miracle. She thought about the other families who had already given up and moved away, about the empty houses scattered across the valley like broken dreams. Was she being foolishly stubborn to keep fighting? Was she putting her pride ahead of her children's welfare? The questions tormented her as she sat in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her. This house that James had built with such love and hope for their future together. Outside, A night bird called across the empty fields, its cry echoing in the stillness. Sarah closed her eyes and made a silent promise to her husband's memory. She would find a way to save their home and protect their children, no matter what it took. But deep in her heart, she wondered if Jake Sullivan might be the answer to her prayers, or if he represented a different kind of danger altogether. Time would tell, but time was the one thing she didn't have enough of. The candle burned lower as Sarah finally climbed the stairs to her own bed, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. In 12 hours, she would need to make a decision that could change everything for her family. The question was whether she had the courage to trust a stranger with their future, or if she should continue fighting this battle alone. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah dreamed of James, standing in their front yard with the sun behind him, telling her that love would find a way. But when she reached for him, he faded like morning mist, leaving her alone with 6 sleeping children and a choice that could save them all or destroy what little they had left. The morning sun brought no relief from the heat that had plagued Cedar Falls for months. Sarah woke to Emma's crying and the sound of the twins arguing over their one remaining toy, a wooden horse that James had carved during their first winter in the house. She lay still for a moment, hoping against hope that the previous night had been a dream, that Jake Sullivan's visit was just her imagination playing tricks on her exhausted mind. But the bank letter still lay on her nightstand where she had placed it before bed, its threatening words unchanged in the harsh light of day. 14 days had become 13. Sarah dressed quickly in her faded blue dress, the one she had worn to church before they could no longer afford the donation plate. She braided her long brown hair into a practical style and went downstairs to face another day of making something from nothing. The children were already awake, as they had been waking earlier each morning since their hunger made sleep difficult. Tommy sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, trying to read from the one school book they still owned. His education had become sporadic since Sarah couldn't afford the school fees, but she insisted he continue learning at home. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. "How are the arithmetic lessons going?" "It's hard to think when my stomach hurts," Tommy admitted, then quickly looked ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mama. I know you're doing your best." Sarah's heart clenched. Her 7-year-old son was already learning to apologize for being human, for having basic needs she couldn't meet. "Don't ever apologize for being hungry, Tommy. That's not your fault." Beth appeared in the doorway holding Emma, who had finally stopped crying but looked pale and listless. "Mama, Emma feels warm again." And Mark threw up in the bedroom. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, fighting back panic. They couldn't afford a doctor, and the last time the children had been sick, she had nearly lost little Matthew to fever. "Bring Emma here, honey. Let me check on Mark." She found the 3-year-old twin sitting on the floor next to his bed, looking miserable. Matthew knelt beside his brother, patting his back with the gentle care that had always marked their relationship. "Mark's tummy hurts," Matthew announced solemnly. Sarah knelt down and felt Mark's forehead. He was definitely fevered, though not as severely as during their winter illness. "When did this start, sweetie?" "This morning," Mark whispered. "I don't feel good." Lucy appeared in the doorway, dragging her battered doll. At 5 years old, she was usually the most cheerful of the children, but hunger and worry had dimmed her natural brightness. "Is Mark sick like baby Emma?" "Emma sick too?" Sarah felt a familiar flutter of fear in her chest. When one child got ill in their weakened condition, it often spread to the others quickly. "She won't eat her breakfast," Beth reported from the kitchen. "Not even the sugar water you made." Sarah gathered Mark in her arms and carried him downstairs, Matthew trailing behind them. She settled Mark on the old sofa in the front room and went to check on Emma, who was indeed running a low fever and refusing even the smallest sips of water. 2 sick children with no money for medicine or a doctor. Sarah sat heavily at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. This was exactly what she had feared most, her children falling ill when she had no resources to help them. "Mama," Tommy's voice was small and uncertain. "Should I walk to town and get the doctor?" We can't afford the doctor right now, honey. The words tasted bitter in Sarah's mouth. What kind of mother couldn't afford medical care for her sick children? I could ask if he would come anyway. Tommy offered, his young face earnest. I could tell him we'll pay him later when we have money. Sarah looked at her son's hopeful expression and felt something inside her crack. Tommy was 7 years old and already trying to solve problems that weren't his responsibility. He should be playing with friends and learning his letters, not worrying about family finances and 6 siblings. That's very thoughtful, Tommy, but I need you here to help with the other children. Sarah stood up with new resolve. I'm going to town myself. Beth, you're in charge while I'm gone. Keep Emma cool with wet cloths, and don't let the twins get too active. Where are you going, Mama? Beth asked, worry creasing her young forehead. Sarah hesitated. The truth was, she was going to find Jake Sullivan. Pride had become a luxury she could no longer afford, not with 2 sick children and 11 days left to save their home. I'm going to see if someone can help us. The walk to town took 40 minutes in the heat, and by the time Sarah reached the Cedar Falls Hotel, her dress was damp with perspiration and her feet ached in her worn boots. The hotel was the finest building in their small town, with painted shutters and a covered porch where travelers could escape the sun. Sarah had never set foot inside before. The lobby seemed impossibly grand with its polished floors and upholstered furniture. She felt conspicuous in her faded dress and work-worn hands, but she approached the desk clerk with as much dignity as she could muster. I'm looking for Mr. Jake Sullivan. I believe he's staying here. The clerk, a thin man with perfectly waxed mustache, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Sullivan is having breakfast in the dining room. Shall I tell him he has a visitor? The pause before visitor spoke volumes about what the clerk thought of her appearance. Sarah lifted her chin. Please tell him Mrs. Mitchell would like to speak with him. Certainly, madam. The clerk's tone suggested it was anything but certain. Sarah waited in the lobby, acutely aware of the other hotel guests glancing at her with curiosity and disapproval. She had almost decided to leave when Jake Sullivan appeared, moving with that slight limp she had noticed the night before. In the bright light of the hotel lobby, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of a man who had spent time outdoors. The scar on his face was more prominent in daylight, giving him a dangerous appearance that was softened by his gentle eyes. Mrs. Mitchell. He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. I wasn't sure you would come. I wasn't sure I would either. Sarah glanced around the lobby, uncomfortable with the attention they were attracting. Could we speak privately? Of course. Would you join me for breakfast? You look like you could use a good meal. The offer was tempting. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had eaten until she was full, but accepting felt too much like charity. I prefer to talk business, Mr. Sullivan. All right then. There's a quiet sitting area upstairs. We can speak there. Jake led her to a small parlor on the second floor, furnished with comfortable chairs and a table by the window. Sarah perched on the edge of a chair, her back straight with nervous tension. Your children, Jake said without preamble. Are they all right? 2 of them are sick with fever. I don't have money for a doctor. The admission came out more forcefully than Sarah intended. She hadn't meant to lead with their most desperate need. Jake's expression darkened with concern. How sick? Fever, vomiting. They're weak from not having enough food. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Saying it aloud made their situation feel even more hopeless. Mrs. Mitchell, forgive me for being direct, but this has gone beyond financial difficulties. Your children need medical attention and proper nutrition immediately. I know that, Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. I'm sorry. I know exactly what they need. What I don't know is how to provide it. Jake leaned forward in his chair. What if I told you that you could have a doctor for your children within the hour and that you'd never have to worry about feeding them again? I'd ask what you wanted in return. Smart woman. Jake smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The truth is, Mrs. Mitchell, I need a family. Sarah blinked in confusion. I beg your pardon? I have business interests that require a certain respectability. A man with a wife and children is seen as stable, trustworthy. A bachelor with my background is viewed with suspicion. Your background? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair. I haven't always made my living in legitimate ways, Mrs. Mitchell. Let's leave it at that. Sarah felt a chill of fear. Are you a criminal? I've done things I'm not proud of, but I've never hurt innocent people, and I've never broken a promise to someone who didn't deserve it. Jake met her eyes steadily. I'm offering you and your children a way out of your situation. In exchange, you would pose as my wife, and your children would be presented as mine. A marriage of convenience, Sarah said slowly. Exactly. You would keep your own room, your own privacy. There would be no intimate expectations. But publicly, we would appear to be a family. Sarah's mind raced. For how long? A year, maybe 2. Long enough for me to establish myself in legitimate business and build the reputation I need. And after that, you'd be free to go wherever you wanted, with enough money to start fresh anywhere you chose. The offer was both tempting and terrifying. Sarah thought of Mark and Emma burning with fever at home, of Tommy trying to be strong for everyone, of Beth carrying responsibilities no 9-year-old should bear. You said you could have a doctor there within the hour? I can have the best doctor in 3 counties at your house before lunch, and a wagon load of food and supplies delivered by this afternoon. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 6 children's futures pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them, Jake was watching her with an unreadable expression. Why, she asked. Why offer this to me specifically? There are other women in difficult situations who would probably jump at this opportunity. Because your husband died trying to save other men. Because you fought for 6 months to keep your family together when most people would have given up. Because when I watched you with your son last night, I saw something I'd forgotten existed, which was a mother's love that puts everything else second. Jake's voice was quiet. I never had that growing up, Mrs. Mitchell. I like to see what a real family looks like, even if it's not quite real. There was something achingly lonely in his words that touched Sarah despite her caution. You mentioned your business interests. What kind of business? Cattle ranching, some mining investments, property development. All legitimate now, I assure you. And the illegitimate past you mentioned? Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, I used to solve problems for people who couldn't solve them through legal channels. Sometimes that required persuasion. You mean violence? Sometimes. Jake's honesty was both disturbing and oddly reassuring. A real criminal would probably lie more smoothly. But that's behind me now. I have enough money to live honestly for the rest of my life. What I don't have is the respectability to invest it properly or build the kind of life I want. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty main street of Cedar Falls. Down there somewhere were her 6 children, 2 of them sick, all of them hungry. In 11 days, they would lose their home unless she found a miracle. If I agreed to this arrangement, she said without turning around, what would be expected of me beyond appearing to be your wife? You'd run the household, manage the domestic affairs. I'd expect you to be civil to business associates and their wives, attend social functions when necessary. Nothing you wouldn't do as the wife of any successful businessman. And my children, how would you treat them? Like they were mine. They'd have everything they needed, food, clothes, education, medical care. I'd protect them and provide for them. Sarah turned to face him. Even though they're not yours? Even though you'd gain nothing from their welfare beyond the appearance of being a family man. Jake's expression was serious. Mrs. Mitchell, those children would be my responsibility. I don't take my responsibilities lightly. There was conviction in his voice that made Sarah want to believe him. But trusting a stranger with her children's lives seemed impossibly reckless. I need time to think about this, she said. How much time? Because if we're going to do this, it needs to happen quickly. The bank won't wait much longer, and your children can't wait at all. The reminder of their immediate crisis hit Sarah like a physical blow. Mark and Emma needed medicine now. Tommy and Beth needed to stop worrying about adult problems and be children again. Lucy and Matthew needed enough food to grow properly. If I agreed, Sarah said carefully, how would this work practically? Where would we live? I have a ranch about 50 miles north of here. Big house, good land, plenty of space for children to run and play. They could have their own rooms, go to the school in town, have friends again. It sounded like paradise compared to their current situation. But Sarah had learned that things that sounded too good to be true usually were. What happens if this arrangement doesn't work out? If we can't convince people we're really married, then we part ways amicably, and I make sure you have enough money to start over wherever you want to go. Jake stood and moved closer to the window. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this sounds like a strange proposition. I know you have every reason to be suspicious of a stranger offering to solve all your problems. But I'm asking you to consider what you have to lose versus what you have to gain. Sarah thought about going home to Mark's fever and Emma's listless crying, about stretching their last few spoonfuls of cornmeal to feed 6 children, about watching Tommy try to be strong when he should be playing. The doctor, she said quietly, you could really have one at my house today. Within 2 hours. Dr. Henderson from the county seat. He's the best physician in the region. And food, enough to feed your family properly for months. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of James. What would he want her to do? He had always told her to trust her instincts about people, to look beyond what they said to what they did. Jake Sullivan was offering her children a future when she had none to give them herself. All right, she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could change her mind. All right, Mr. Sullivan, I'll accept your proposition. Jake's shoulders visibly relaxed, as if he had been holding his breath. You won't regret this decision, Mrs. Mitchell. I give you my word. I hope your word is worth something, Mr. Sullivan, because I'm about to bet my children's lives on it. It's worth everything, Jake said solemnly. And please call me Jake. If we're going to convince people we're married, we should probably use first names. Sarah nodded, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. Sarah. My name is Sarah. Sarah. Jake smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. It's a beautiful name. When does this arrangement begin? Today. I'll send for the doctor immediately, and we'll have supplies delivered to your house. Tomorrow, we'll need to go into town and make it official, get married by the justice of the peace, arrange for the property transfer, all the legal details. Married. The word felt strange on Sarah's tongue. She had never imagined marrying anyone other than James. In name only, Jake reminded her gently. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. And my children? How do we explain to them that suddenly they have a new father? Jake considered this. We tell them the truth, as much as they need to know. That I'm going to take care of them and their mother, and that in return, they're going to help me build a new life. Children understand fairness better than adults sometimes. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety about how Tommy and Beth would react to this news. They had been so protective of their father's memory, so suspicious of the men who had tried to court their mother over the past months. I should get back to them, Sarah said. They'll be worried, and Mark and Emma need attention. Of course. I'll ride out to your place with Dr. Henderson. We'll follow with supplies later this afternoon. Jake paused at the door. Sarah, thank you for trusting me with your family. I won't let you down. As Sarah walked back through the dusty streets of Cedar Falls, her mind spun with the magnitude of what she had just agreed to. In less than 24 hours, she would be married to a man she barely knew, and her children would have a father they had never met. But for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Tonight, Mark and Emma would have medicine for their fever. Tonight, all 6 children would go to bed with full stomachs. Tomorrow, they would begin a new life that might give them everything James had dreamed of providing for them. Sarah quickened her pace, eager to get home to her children and prepare them for the changes that were coming. She didn't know if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst mistake imaginable. But she knew that doing nothing meant watching her children suffer, and that was a choice she could no longer live with. The sun beat down mercilessly as she walked, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could see beyond the heat and drought to something better waiting on the horizon. Whether that something would prove to be salvation or disaster remained to be seen. Sarah arrived home to find Beth pacing the front porch with Emma in her arms, her young face creased with worry. Tommy sat on the steps, keeping watch over the twins, who lay listlessly in the shade of the old oak tree that James had planted the year Tommy was born. "Mama!" Beth ran to her, relief flooding her voice. "Mark got worse. He threw up again, and now Matthew feels sick too." Sarah's heart lurched as she took Emma from Beth's arms. The baby felt even warmer than before, and her little body seemed to have lost what little weight she had carried. "Where are Lucy and Tommy?" "Lucy's inside lying down. She says her tummy hurts." "And Tommy?" Beth's voice wavered. "Tommy tried to walk to town to get help, but he only made it to the road before he had to come back. He's so weak, Mama." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back panic. 4 of her 6 children were now showing signs of illness, and she had no medicine, no money, and no way to help them except to trust a stranger's promise. "Help is coming," Sarah told Beth, praying desperately that Jake Sullivan would keep his word. "A doctor is coming today." "Really?" Beth's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. "How?" "We don't have money for a doctor. I'll explain everything later. Right now, let's get everyone inside where it's cooler." Sarah spent the next hour moving between her sick children, offering what comfort she could with cool cloths and gentle words. Mark's fever had indeed gotten worse, and Matthew was beginning to show the same symptoms. Lucy lay curled on the sofa, too miserable to play with her beloved doll. Even Tommy, who had been trying so hard to be strong, had given in to his body's weakness and was resting in a chair by the window. Only Beth remained fully alert, but Sarah could see the exhaustion in her daughter's eyes. At 9 years old, Beth had been shouldering responsibilities that would challenge an adult, and the stress was taking its toll on her as well. Sarah was sponging Mark's fevered brow when the sound of horses approaching made her look up sharply. Through the window, she could see 2 men on horseback coming up the dusty path to their house. One was Jake Sullivan, looking competent and assured even on horseback. The other was an older gentleman with a black medical bag secured to his saddle. Relief flooded through Sarah with such intensity that her knees went weak. Jake had kept his promise. Help had actually come. "Beth, there's some men outside who are going to help us," Sarah said carefully. "I need you to be polite and helpful, but let me do the talking." Beth nodded solemnly, her maturity once again breaking Sarah's heart. Sarah smoothed her hair and dressed as best she could before opening the front door. Jake dismounted and approached the porch, followed by the older man who could only be Dr. Henderson. "Sarah," Jake said, his voice gentle with concern. "How are the children?" The casual use of her first name felt strange, but she realized they needed to start acting like people who knew each other well. 4 of them are sick now. Mark is the worst, but Matthew and Lucy are getting worse too. Dr. Henderson stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Dr. Henderson. Your husband tells me you have some sick children who need attention." Sarah started at hearing herself called Mrs. Sullivan, but quickly recovered. "Yes, doctor. Thank you so much for coming. Let's have a look at them, shall we?" For the next hour, Dr. Henderson examined each child with thorough professionalism while Jake waited on the front porch. Sarah watched nervously as the doctor listened to small chests, checked temperatures, and asked gentle questions of the children who were well enough to respond. "Mama," Tommy whispered when Dr. Henderson came to examine him. "Who's that man on the porch?" "I'll explain everything soon, sweetheart. Just rest for now." When Dr. Henderson finished his examinations, he sat down with Sarah at the kitchen table while Jake joined them, his presence somehow both reassuring and unsettling. "Your children are suffering from malnutrition and dehydration," Dr. Henderson said without preamble. "The fever and stomach upset are their body's response to being severely undernourished. They need immediate and sustained nutritional support, plenty of clean water, and rest." Sarah felt shame burn in her cheeks. I've done everything I could to feed them properly. I'm sure you have, Mrs. Sullivan. These are difficult times for many families. Dr. Henderson's voice held no judgment. The good news is that with proper care, they should recover fully. I'm leaving medicine to bring down the fevers, and I brought some special nutrition powders that can be mixed with milk or water to help rebuild their strength. Thank you, Sarah whispered, tears of gratitude threatening to spill over. Dr. Henderson packed his medical bag and stood. I'll return in 3 days to check on their progress. In the meantime, small, frequent meals of easily digestible foods. Broth, bread soaked in milk, soft fruits if you can find them, and plenty of fluids. Jake walked the doctor to the door. Send your bill to my business manager in Denver, Sarah heard him say. And thank you for coming so quickly. Quite all right. Those are good children, and they have a mother who clearly loves them very much. They'll be fine with proper care. After Dr. Henderson left, Jake returned to the kitchen where Sarah sat staring at the bottles of medicine and packages of nutritional supplement the doctor had left behind. More help than she had been able to provide her children in months, delivered in a single afternoon by a man she had met less than 24 hours ago. The supply wagon should be here within the hour, Jake said quietly. Food, clothes for the children, household necessities. Everything you need to get back on your feet. Sarah looked up at him. This stranger who was about to become her husband. Why are you really doing this, Jake? And please don't tell me it's just for business respectability. There had to be easier ways to achieve that goal. Jake pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his weathered hands folded on the table. You want the truth? I think I deserve it, considering what I'm agreeing to. The truth is, I grew up in an orphanage in San Francisco. 15 kids to a room, barely enough food to keep us alive, and caretakers who saw us as burdens rather than children. Jake's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah could hear old pain underneath. I learned early that if you wanted something in life, you had to take it. Nobody was going to give you anything out of kindness. Sarah remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. I left when I was 14 and made my way in the world through whatever means necessary. I won't lie to you about the things I've done, Sarah. I've hurt people who probably didn't deserve it, and I've taken things that weren't mine to take. Jake met her eyes steadily. But I never hurt children, and I never took food from hungry families. And now I have more money than I know what to do with, and I'm tired of being the kind of man people cross the street to avoid. When I heard about your situation, about a woman fighting to keep her family together, Jake shrugged. Maybe I saw a chance to do something right for once in my life. Before Sarah could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway, looking pale but determined. Mama, who is this man, and why is he in our house? Sarah's heart clenched at the suspicion in her son's voice. She had hoped to explain the situation to all the children together, but Tommy's protective instinct had kicked in. Tommy, come sit with us. This is Mr. Sullivan, and he's going to help our family. Tommy approached cautiously, his small body tense with wariness. Help us how? Jake leaned back in his chair, making himself less imposing. Well, Tommy, your mama, and I have made an arrangement. I'm going to take care of you and your brothers and sisters. Make sure you have enough food and medicine when you're sick, and a good place to live. What do you get? Tommy asked bluntly. Sarah saw Jake's eyebrows rise slightly at her son's directness. That's a fair question. I get a family. You see, I've been alone most of my life, and I'd like to know what it feels like to have people who matter to me. Are you going to marry our mama? The question came out like an accusation. Yes, Jake said simply, but not in the way you might be thinking. Your mama will still be your mama, and you'll still be her children. I'll just be an extra person who wants to help take care of everyone. Tommy studied Jake's scarred face with the intense scrutiny only children possess. What happened to your face? Tommy, Sarah started to scold, but Jake held up a hand. It's all right. I was in a fight with some bad men who were trying to hurt someone who couldn't defend himself. I got cut with a knife, but the other man got away safely. Did you win a fight? A slow smile spread across Jake's face. I won the fight. Tommy nodded as if this made perfect sense. Our papa died, saving people too. In the mine. I heard about that. Your papa was a brave man. He was the best papa ever. Tommy's voice carried a challenge, as if daring Jake to disagree. I'm sure he was. And I'm not trying to replace him, Tommy. Nobody could do that. I'm just trying to help your family the way I think he would want someone to help if he couldn't be here himself. Tommy considered this for a long moment. If you marry our mama and take care of us, what do we call you? Whatever feels right to you. Mr. Sullivan, Jake, or nothing at all if you prefer. The sound of wagon wheels approaching interrupted their conversation. Sarah looked out the window to see a large wagon loaded with supplies pulling up to their house. Two men began unloading wooden crates and canvas bags, more goods than Sarah had seen in one place since before James died. Tommy, Sarah said, why don't you go tell Beth and the others that food and supplies are here? But don't wake the little ones if they're sleeping. As Tommy ran off, Sarah turned back to Jake. This is really happening, isn't it? Tomorrow we'll be married, and my children will have a new life. Are you having second thoughts? Sarah watched through the window as the men continued unloading supplies. Bags of flour, sides of bacon, canned goods, fresh vegetables, bolts of cloth, children's shoes, blankets, soap, and dozens of other things they desperately needed. Enough to sustain her family for months. No second thoughts, she said firmly. But I want to be clear about something, Jake. These are my children, and I will always put their welfare first. If this arrangement ever becomes harmful to them in any way, I'll take them and leave, regardless of any agreements we've made. I wouldn't expect anything less. That's exactly the kind of mother they need. Beth appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the activity outside. Mama, there are men bringing us food. Lots and lots of food. I know, honey. Come meet Mr. Sullivan. He's the one who arranged for the doctor and all these supplies. Beth approached shyly, still clutching Emma, who had finally fallen into a more peaceful sleep after receiving Dr. Henderson's medicine. Thank you for helping us, sir. You're very welcome, Beth. And thank you for taking such good care of your brothers and sisters. That's a big responsibility for a young lady. Somebody had to, Beth said matter-of-factly. Mama can't do everything by herself. No, she can't. But she won't have to anymore. Over the next several hours, Sarah watched in amazement as Jake directed the unloading and organization of supplies with quiet efficiency. He seemed to know exactly what a household with 6 children would need, down to details like extra soap for frequent laundry and sturdy shoes that would last through active play. The children, even the sick ones, perked up considerably as the reality of abundant food settled in. Sarah prepared a simple but nourishing supper of fresh bread, butter, milk, and soup made from vegetables that had arrived in the wagon. For the first time in months, she was able to fill 6 bowls without worrying about how much was left. Mama, Lucy said around a mouthful of bread thick with butter, this is the best supper ever. It's just bread and soup, sweetheart. But there's enough, Lucy said with 5-year-old wisdom. There's enough for everyone. As evening approached, and the children's bellies were finally full, Sarah began preparing them for bed. The medicine was working, and the fevers were breaking. Mark was sitting up for the first time all day, and even baby Emma was taking sips of milk again. Jake had spent most of the afternoon on the front porch, giving the family space to adjust to their new circumstances. Now, as Sarah finished tucking the children into bed, she found him still sitting outside, looking out over their drought-stricken land. They'll be all right, Sarah said, settling into the chair beside him. Dr. Henderson was right. They just needed proper food and medicine. You did an incredible job keeping them alive, Sarah. Most people in your situation would have given up months ago. Most people don't have 6 children depending on them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of settling children and night creatures beginning their calls. Finally, Jake spoke. Tomorrow we'll go into town and make it legal. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about standing before a justice of the peace and promising to honor and obey a man she barely knew. It felt like a betrayal of everything she had shared with James, even though her rational mind knew this was different. I'm prepared to do what's necessary for my children. That's honest. I appreciate honesty. Jake turned to look at her in the gathering darkness. Sarah, I want you to know that I understand what you're sacrificing by agreeing to this arrangement. I know you loved your husband, and I know this isn't the life you planned for yourself. Plans change, Sarah said quietly. James used to say that life has a way of writing its own story, whether we like the plot or not. He sounded like a wise man. He was. And he would want his children to be safe and cared for, even if it meant accepting help from a stranger. Sarah looked at Jake's profile in the dim light. You've kept every promise you made today. The doctor came, the medicine worked, my children went to bed with full stomachs for the first time in months. I suppose that counts for something. I hope it counts for trust, because tomorrow we become a family, and families need to trust each other. Sarah thought about Tommy's acceptance of Jake's explanation, about Beth's shy gratitude, about the way Jake had known exactly what supplies to bring for children he had never met. Maybe trust had to start somewhere, and maybe actions really did speak louder than words. Tomorrow, Sarah agreed. Tomorrow we become the Sullivan family. As if saying it aloud made it real, Sarah felt a fundamental shift in her understanding of what her life was about to become. In 12 hours, she would have a husband again, her children would have a father figure, and they would all have security for the first time since James died. Whether it would work remained to be seen. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah fell asleep to the sound of 6 children breathing peacefully, their bellies full and their fevers broken. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight was enough. The morning of Sarah's second wedding day dawned clear and hot, with no sign of the drought ending. But inside the Mitchell house, there was an atmosphere of cautious hope that had been absent for months. The children woke to the smell of bacon cooking and fresh biscuits in the oven, luxuries they had almost forgotten existed. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake tend to his horses in their small barn. He had spent the night in the barn, insisting it wouldn't be proper for him to sleep in the house before they were married. Even in their unusual circumstances, he seemed determined to maintain certain proprieties. "Mama," Beth said softly, appearing at Sarah's elbow. "Are you scared about today?" Sarah looked down at her eldest daughter, who seemed to see and understand far too much for a 9-year-old. A little scared, yes, but also hopeful. Change is always frightening, even when it's good change. Tommy has been awake since before sunrise, sitting by the window watching Mr. Sullivan. And what does Tommy think about everything? Beth considered the question with her usual seriousness. I think he likes that Mr. Sullivan treats him like he's important instead of just a little boy who should be quiet. And he likes that Mr. Sullivan knows about fighting and being brave. Sarah smiled at this insight. Tommy had indeed been fascinated by Jake's stories about standing up to dangerous men, though Jake had been careful to frame such stories in terms of protecting others rather than glorifying violence. What about you, Beth? How do you feel about all of this? I think Mr. Sullivan has kind eyes, Beth said after a moment. And I think he really wants to take care of us, not just pretend to for his business. But Mama, what is it, sweetheart? I still miss Papa. Getting a new Papa doesn't mean we don't miss our real Papa anymore, does it? Sarah knelt down and pulled Beth into a hug, her heart aching with love and grief in equal measure. Oh, honey, no. Nothing will ever change how much we love Papa or how much he loves us. Mr. Sullivan isn't trying to replace Papa. Nobody could do that. He's just trying to help us build a new kind of family, so we can love Papa and still like Mr. Sullivan. Absolutely. Love isn't something that gets used up, Beth. Having more people to care about doesn't mean we love the important people any less. Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy bursting through the kitchen door, his face bright with excitement. Mama, Mr. Sullivan is teaching me how to care for horses. He says every man should know how to handle horses properly. Sarah exchanged a glance with Beth. Jake seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what each child needed. Tommy craved the guidance and attention of a man, while Beth needed reassurance and gentle understanding. That's wonderful, Tommy. Did you thank Mr. Sullivan for taking the time to teach you? Yes, ma'am. And, Mama, he says after we move to his ranch, I can have my own horse to take care of. A real horse, just for me. The excitement in Tommy's voice was infectious, but it also reminded Sarah of how much their lives were about to change. In a few hours, they would be married. Within a week, they would leave the only home these children had ever known and travel to a ranch 50 miles away to start an entirely new life. Tommy, you need to remember that Mr. Sullivan's offers are very generous, but they're not promises unless he specifically says they are. Don't assume anything or get your hopes up too high. But he did promise, Mama. He said, Tommy, I promise you'll have your own horse. He used the word promise and everything. Sarah felt a flutter of unease. Jake seemed to be making commitments to her children without consulting her first. While she appreciated his desire to make them happy, she worried about the expectations he was creating. Mama, Lucy called from the front room. Mr. Sullivan says he has presents for us. Sarah hurried to the front room to find Jake kneeling on the floor, surrounded by all 6 children. Even Mark and Matthew, though still weak from their illness, were bright-eyed with curiosity. Jake had brought several wrapped packages from his saddlebags and was distributing them with ceremony. What's all this? Sarah asked, feeling overwhelmed by yet another display of generosity. I thought the children should have something special for today, Jake explained, looking slightly embarrassed. I know this is all confusing for them, and I wanted them to have something positive to remember about the day we became a family. Lucy unwrapped her package to reveal a beautiful new doll with a porcelain head and real hair far finer than any toy she had ever owned. Her eyes went wide with wonder as she clutched it to her chest. She's beautiful, Lucy whispered. What's her name? That's for you to decide, Jake said gently. She's yours now. The twins received matching wooden trucks, sturdy and well-made, perfect for active little boys. They immediately began racing them across the floor, their recent illness temporarily forgotten in the joy of new toys. Beth's package contained a set of books, real books with beautiful illustrations and stories she had never read. Her face lit up with a scholar's delight as she carefully examined each one. These are wonderful, she breathed. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Tommy's gift was a leather knife sheath with a small but real knife inside, suitable for a boy learning to handle tools and take on responsibilities. Sarah felt a moment of maternal concern. Tommy was only 7, but she could see the pride on his face at being trusted with something so grown-up. This is for learning, Jake told Tommy seriously. A tool, not a toy. You'll need to show me you can handle it responsibly before you can carry it regularly. I will, Tommy promised solemnly. I'll be very careful. Baby Emma received a soft stuffed lamb that she immediately tried to eat, much to everyone's amusement. Even in her weakened state, she seemed delighted with the toy's texture and softness. Jake, Sarah said quietly, this is very generous, but it's also quite a lot. I don't want the children to expect constant gifts. Of course not. This is for today only, to mark a special occasion. Jake stood and brushed dust from his knees. Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment? They stepped onto the front porch, leaving the children absorbed in their new treasures. Sarah could hear Lucy already chattering to her new doll, making up elaborate stories about the doll's imaginary life. I wanted to talk to you before we go to town, Jake said, about expectations and boundaries. I was hoping we could discuss that. I'm concerned about promises being made to the children without my input. You're absolutely right to be concerned. I should have checked with you before offering Tommy his own horse. Jake leaned against the porch railing, his expression serious. I'm not used to thinking about another parent's approval. I'll be more careful about that. Thank you. I also want to discuss what happens if. Sarah struggled with how to phrase her concern delicately. If this arrangement doesn't work out. Yes. If for any reason we need to end this marriage, what happens to the children? They're already starting to care about you, Jake. I can see it in their faces. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the barren landscape. Sarah, I meant what I said about taking responsibility for them. If our arrangement ended tomorrow, I would still make sure those children were provided for. They would still have their education funded, their medical needs met, their futures secured, even though you would have no legal obligation to them. Especially because I would have no legal obligation. It would be the right thing to do. Jake turned to meet her eyes. I know you have no reason to trust my word about this, but I'm hoping that over time, you'll see that I mean what I say. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All she saw was sincerity and something that looked like loneliness. Whatever Jake Sullivan's past might hold, he seemed genuinely committed to this strange family they were creating. All right, she said, I'm willing to take this one step at a time and see how it develops. That's all I can ask for. Jake checked his pocket watch. We should leave for town in about an hour. The justice of the peace is expecting us at noon. The children. I've arranged for Mrs. Garrett from the neighboring farm to come sit with them. She'll give them lunch and keep them entertained until we return. Sarah felt a flicker of irritation that Jake had made arrangements involving her children without consulting her, then reminded herself that he was trying to be helpful. Learning to navigate shared decision-making would take time for both of them. What should I tell them about where we're going? The truth, that we're going to town to get married so that I can legally become their stepfather and take care of them properly. An hour later, Sarah found herself sitting beside Jake in his well-appointed buggy, heading toward Cedar Falls. She wore her best dress, a blue cotton that had seen better days, but was clean and pressed. Jake had dressed formally in a dark suit and clean white shirt, looking more like a successful businessman than the rough stranger who had appeared at her door 2 nights ago. Nervous? Jake asked as they approached the town limits. Terrified, Sarah admitted. I keep thinking about my first wedding day. James and I were so young and so sure we knew what we were doing. How old were you? 18. James was 20. We thought we were very sophisticated and mature. Sarah smiled at the memory. We were married in the little church here in town, with both our families present. I wore my mother's wedding dress, and we had a celebration that lasted until midnight. This is quite different. Yes, it is. Sarah glanced at Jake's profile. Do you ever think about getting married for real someday? To someone you actually love? I used to think about it when I was younger, but somewhere along the way, I stopped believing that was possible for someone like me. Someone like you? Someone with my history. Someone who has done the things I've done. Jake guided the buggy around a pothole. I learned to focus on things I could control, making money, building security, staying alive. Love seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. And now, Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, Now I'm hoping to learn what it feels like to be part of something bigger than myself. Even if it's not quite real, it might be close enough. The sadness in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. Whatever Jake Sullivan had done in his past, he was clearly a man who had missed out on the basic human connections most people took for granted. They reached the Justice of the Peace's office just before noon. Judge Morrison was a portly man with a gray beard who had been performing weddings and settling disputes in Cedar Falls for over 20 years. He greeted them with professional courtesy, though Sarah could see curiosity in his eyes about this hasty marriage. Do you have witnesses? Judge Morrison asked. I've arranged for Mr. Peterson and Mr. Hayes from the bank to serve as witnesses, Jake replied smoothly. Sarah felt a pang at the clinical efficiency of it all. When she had married James, her sister had been her maid of honor, and James's brother had stood up for him. This wedding felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love and commitment. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Judge Morrison read the standard vows, and Sarah found herself promising to love, honor, and obey a man she had known for 2 days. When it came time to exchange rings, Jake produced a simple gold band from his pocket. I hope it fits, he said quietly as he slipped it on Sarah's finger. It was slightly loose, but not uncomfortably so. You may kiss the bride, Judge Morrison announced, and Sarah felt her heart race with panic. She and Jake had never discussed this part of the ceremony. Jake seemed to sense her discomfort. He leaned forward and placed a gentle, brief kiss on her cheek, nothing more intimate than a brother's affection. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said softly, and Sarah felt the full weight of her new identity settling around her like an unfamiliar garment. After signing the marriage certificate and paying the fee, they emerged from the courthouse as husband and wife. The whole process had taken less than 30 minutes, but Sarah felt like her entire world had shifted. "How do you feel?" Jake asked as they climbed back into the buggy. "Like I'm wearing someone else's life," Sarah answered honestly. "Mrs. Sullivan sounds like a stranger's name. It'll take time to feel natural. Everything will." They rode back toward the farm in contemplative silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what they had just done. Sarah found herself twisting the unfamiliar wedding ring on her finger, thinking about the ring James had placed there 9 years ago. That ring now hung on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress but still close to her heart. As they turned into the lane leading to her house, their house now, she supposed, Sarah could see the children playing in the yard under Mrs. Garrett's supervision. Tommy was showing off his new knife to the neighbor woman, while Beth sat reading one of her new books in the shade. The twins were chasing each other with their toy trucks, and Lucy was having an elaborate tea party with her new doll and Emma, who was sitting up and looking much improved. "They look happy," Jake observed. "They do. Healthier, too, now that they're eating properly and have had medical attention." "Sarah," Jake said as he pulled the buggy to a stop, "I want you to know that regardless of how this arrangement works out between us, seeing those children healthy and happy makes everything worthwhile." Sarah looked at his face and saw genuine emotion there. Whatever his motivations for this marriage might be, his concern for her children seemed entirely real. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. I know this isn't a normal marriage, but you've given my children their future back. We've given each other a chance at something better than what we had before. That's not nothing." As they approached the house, Tommy came running to meet them, his face bright with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Garrett let us make cookies." And Mark ate 3 whole cookies by himself. "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, lifting Tommy into a hug. "Did you thank Mrs. Garrett for taking such good care of everyone?" "Yes, ma'am. And I showed her my new knife, but I didn't take it out of the sheath because Mr. Sullivan said it's a tool, not a toy." Jake smiled at Tommy's careful repetition of the safety lesson. "That's exactly right, son. You're learning to be responsible." The word son seemed to slip out naturally, and Sarah saw Tommy's face light up at being addressed that way. For a moment, she could almost imagine this was a real family, a father coming home to his children after a day's work. But as the afternoon wore on and they began the practical work of preparing to leave their old life behind, Sarah was reminded again of how artificial their situation really was. Jake might be kind to her children and generous with his resources, but he was still essentially a stranger who had married her for business reasons. Still, as she watched him patiently answer Lucy's endless questions about their new home and listened to Beth's excited chatter about the books he had given her, Sarah began to think that maybe artificial didn't necessarily mean harmful. Her children were happy, healthy, and secure for the first time in months. If that came at the cost of a marriage without love, perhaps it was a fair trade. Time would tell whether Jake Sullivan would prove to be the salvation of her family or just another complication in their already complicated lives. But for tonight, Sarah chose to focus on the sight of 6 children going to bed with full bellies, new treasures, and hope for the future. That alone was worth whatever uncertainty lay ahead. 3 days later, Sarah stood on the front porch of the home James had built, watching Jake load the last of their belongings into the wagon that would take them to their new life. The children were scattered around the yard, saying goodbye to familiar places in their own ways. Tommy was carefully examining the barn where he had helped his father with chores. Beth was picking wildflowers from the meadow where she had played with her dolls, and the twins were collecting smooth stones from the creek bed where they had spent countless summer afternoons. "It's harder than I expected," Sarah admitted to Jake as he secured their few pieces of furniture under canvas covers. "Leaving home always is, even when you're going to something better." Jake glanced at the children, understanding the weight of what they were asking them to give up. They can visit whenever they want, you know? This will always be where they came from. Will it? You own the property now. I own the property, but they own the memories. And Sarah? Jake paused in his work to look at her directly. This house will always belong to them. It's in my will that if anything happens to me, this land goes back to your children. Sarah felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. James built this place for his family. It should stay in his family. The generosity of the gesture, the understanding behind it, touched something deep in Sarah's heart. This man who claimed to be motivated purely by business considerations seemed to understand the importance of honoring her late husband's legacy. Mama. Lucy called from the garden. Can I take some of Papa's flowers to our new house? Sarah looked at the struggling remnants of the garden James had planted for her their first spring in the house. Most of it had died in the drought, but a few hardy perennials had survived. Of course, sweetheart. We'll dig them up carefully and plant them in our new garden. As Lucy began carefully unearthing a clump of daisies, Beth approached with her arms full of the books Jake had given her. Mr. Sullivan, how long will it take us to get to the ranch? About 2 days with the wagon and all our supplies. We'll camp one night on the trail, which should be an adventure for you children. I've never slept outside before, Beth said, her eyes bright with anticipation. Neither have I, confided Jake with a conspiratorial whisper. I usually stay in hotels when I travel. This will be a new experience for both of us. Sarah listened to this exchange with growing amazement at Jake's ability to connect with her children. He seemed to instinctively know how to speak to each of them, treating Tommy like a fellow man, engaging Beth's love of learning, maintaining the twins' boundless energy, and showing infinite patience with Lucy's endless questions.